Hi everyone. Today we're going to be doing a lesson just on shading. And I know we've done shading in class before. You guys have done projects that include shading. But I thought it would be good for us to spend a little time practicing and learning a little bit more about shading. Shading is a very important skill to have as an artist. So we want to make sure we get a lot of practice and we know as much as we can about shading. So let's get started. So if you're in Advanced Art at G.I.F.T or in Art 2 at Heritage, you will recognize this project. This was one of our first projects of the year, and it was all about creating a value scale. And we made our value scale into a layered cake, or I also gave you a choice of making it into an ice cream cone. So hopefully you remember this project. If you're in intermediate art at G.I.F.T, you didn't do this particular project, but we have talked about value scales before. And that's a very important part of shading. So we're going to be talking about value scales today, and we're going to be making a little value scale in our sketchbook. But let's talk about our tools first. You can see that I have a variety of drawing tools here, shading tools. So I have some different pencils, and if all you have at home is a regular HB number 2 pencil, that's fine. You'll still be able to do these shading exercises, but it is helpful to have some B pencils. So if you have some B pencils at home, that's even better. And I've got a variety here of different brands, and I have a 6B, an 8B, a 3B, different types of pencils. And then if you have any blending tools at home, that would also be great. If you don't, you can use a Q-tip, or you can even just use your finger. So a value scale is just showing dark and light, and it's a gradual darkening or a gradual lightening using your pencil, or you can do it with other types of medium too. But for us, for today, we're going to use our pencil. So let's start with a regular HB number 2 pencil. And I'm going to work from light to dark. So I'm going to start with my lightest value. So I'm just going to shade as lightly as I possibly can, so I'm not using any pressure whatsoever with my pencil. Okay? Now, don't be thrown off by the term shading. Shading just means coloring in with your pencil. So that's all that it means. But all right, so I just shaded very lightly with my number 2 pencil. Now I'm going to blend it a little bit and soften it using my blending tool. And I'm going to just use the pencil that's on my blending tool to add an even lighter value. See how that's even lighter? And I can even do it a little lighter. If I just do it maybe once, I really got a very light value there. So I'll call that my lightest one. So I'm going to start with number 1 there. This is going to be number 2, and that's number 3. All right, so I have 3 values now already just using my number 2 pencil and a blending tool. Again, if you don't have a blending tool, you can try using a Q-tip or your finger, which I'll show you in just a minute. All right, so now I'm trying to go darker each time. I'm going to press a little bit harder with my number 2 pencil, but not too hard. And now I'm going to press even harder. Okay, so before I've even blended and used a blending tool, you can see that those values are getting darker. So let's try blending them now. This time I'll use a Q-tip. So I'm just kind of rubbing over the pencil, and it softens it and smooths it out. Okay, so now I have 2 more values. I have number 4 and number 5. And what pencil have I used so far? Only my HB. So again, don't worry if you don't have B, higher numbered B pencils at home, that's okay. You can just use your number 2 HB pencil, and already I've gotten 5 different values. All right, so let's see how many I can get out of this pencil. Now I'm going to press even harder. See how dark that is? And then this will be my darkest with my HB number 2 pencil. All right, so now I'm going to blend it again. So I'm using a Q-tip, and I'm just softening and darkening and smoothing those values. Okay, so now let's see, 6 and 7. So there, I just got 7 different values or 7 different shades of pencil just using this regular number 2 HB pencil. All right, let's see what other values I can get using a softer pencil. So now I'm going to switch to, this is actually a 6B pencil. And remember, the higher the number, the softer the pencil, the darker the pencil. So I'm not going to press very hard. And you can see right away how much darker this pencil is, and I'm not even pressing hard. Now this time I am going to press hard. Wow. Look how dark that is. Okay, so I'm going to blend again and smooth it out. And there I have 2 more values. So now we're going to put those as 8 and 9. So I have 9 different values or 9 different shades of pencil. So let's try to do one more. For this one, I'm going to use an 8B. And I'm going to press hard with my pencil. And I'm not pressing so hard that I break the pencil or my hand hurts, but I am pressing kind of hard. So that's pretty dark. Do you see how dark that is? Okay, so now we'll call that number 10. And so I have 10 different values, 10 different shades with my pencil. So this is a value scale. So if you weren't doing it along with me, why don't you pause the video now and work on doing a value scale. Try to get 10 different values. Even if all you have is a number 2 HB pencil, I want you to try to get 10 values. If you can't get 10 out of just using this, try to do at least 7 or 8. If you have some B pencils, then definitely you can get 10. So why don't you work on that for just a few minutes, pause the video, and then you can come back. Okay, so now that you did your value scale, we're going to shade a very simple shape. We're going to shade a circle. Okay, so there's a circle. And what's the difference between a circle and a sphere? Well, a sphere is a 3-dimensional shape, right? It's a 3-dimensional circle. So how do we make our circle look like a 3-dimensional shape, look like a sphere? Well, it's all going to be through shading. So I'm going to take you through just the different levels of shading that you can do. So when you're a beginner student, you might just shade in the whole thing one color like this. Okay, and that's just one level of shading. And there's nothing wrong with that. We have a shaded circle. Okay, the next level is if you were to blend it. Use a blending tool of some kind, whether it be a Q-tip or a store-bought blending tool like I'm using now. We can use a blending tool on that and smooth it out. And that would be another stage, another level of shading. So that looks pretty good, right? It looks much better now that I blended it than before I blended it, right? Okay, so now let me show you another stage of shading. The next stage of shading is to add some more values. So, what number do you think this circle matches on my value scale? Well, if you were to ask me, I would say it's probably somewhere around 3 or 4. Maybe right in the middle of 3 and 4. It's probably a little bit darker than 3, but not quite as dark as 4. So that's where my circle falls on the value scale. So I want to add some different values to my circle. In order for it to look more three-dimensional, I want to add some shadow and I want to add some highlights. So if I add shadow, which would be darker, and highlight, which would be lighter, that would be at least 3 different shades that I will have on my circle, or 3 different values. Okay, so let's add some shadow. Now, before you add the shadow, you get to decide where you want your light to be coming from. And wherever you want the light to be coming from, that will decide where the shadow is. So let's say the light is coming from here, whatever our light source is, whether it's a light from a lamp or the sun or whatever it might be, the light's going to be coming from here down, shining down on our sphere or our circle from here. So if this is where the light is hitting it, then the shadowy part would be opposite of that spot. So our dark shadowy place would be down at the bottom and on the right side of the circle, since the light is coming from the left. Okay, so I'm going to give it some shadow. So I'm going to take my 6B pencil, and I'm not pressing very hard. I'm not pressing hard at all. It's just that this is a soft pencil, and so it's darker. So do you see how I'm shading a much darker value on the right side and at the bottom? Almost like if you think of this as the moon, you know, the circle would be like the full moon. And right now I'm shading like a crescent moon shape. Okay, so there I have a darker value. I shaded it a little bit darker, and now I want to blend it. So again, you can use your finger, you can use a Q-tip. I'm using a regular blending tool here. You can use it in a circular motion if you want, or back and forth like this. Okay, so now my circle has a shadow. And then I want to add a highlight. A highlight is a lighter part of your object, and it's going to be lightest and brightest where the light is hitting it. So if we decided we want our light to be coming from this direction, then we're going to have a highlight right about here. See that? Right about there where the light is hitting it. And the way I'm going to do that is using my eraser. Okay, so I made a very light spot, and I can even make that a little bit bigger. And now I want to go back to blending. Again, you can use your finger if you have to, or your Q-tip. And I'm just blending it a little bit, not too much. I don't want to take away all that light area. So now I have a highlight. Okay, so now our circle is looking a little bit more three-dimensional, isn't it? It's a little bit more like a sphere and less like a flat circle. I see a line here that I want to get rid of, so there we go. I can soften this a little bit more. All right, just wanted to get rid of that line. Okay, do you notice too that when I blend, instead of just 3 shades, I end up actually with more than 3, because I have the darkest around the edge, then it gets a little bit lighter, a little bit lighter, a little bit lighter towards my highlight. All right, the last thing I would want to do is shade a cast shadow. A cast shadow is the shadow that the object is casting on the wall or on the table where it's sitting. So it's going to be opposite from where the light source is coming from. So since the light source is coming here, and here's our highlight, the shadow is going to be over here. And so the shadow is just going to be like this. And I can go right off the edge of the paper if I want. And I'm blending it. Okay, so now it looks like a three-dimensional sphere that is casting a shadow on the table. Okay, so if you were following along with me, great. If you weren't and you were just watching, that's fine. But now I'd like you to pause the video and I want you to try this. I want you to draw a circle, shade it, then create a shadow, blend it, and then create a highlight with your eraser and blend that a little bit too, and then draw or shade in a cast shadow. Okay, so hopefully you finished shading in your circle and made it more of a three-dimensional sphere. If you're in intermediate art or you're in Art 2 at Heritage, you will probably recognize this project. At the beginning of the year, we did 3 pears or 3 apples. I gave you a choice of apples or pears. And remember, we did shading on one of them. We did them 3 different ways, right? Actually 4 different ways. We did colored pencil, we did pencil shading, we did stippling, and we did watercolor painting. And we did a cast shadow. So this is not new for you guys. You guys have done this before, but you may have forgotten how to do it, or it may be that you just need some more practice. And maybe when it comes to shading more complicated things, it's a little, it might be a little bit overwhelming. So I did give you a project of drawing a rhinoceros, and I demonstrate shading that in the video. So that is obviously a much more complicated, well, it's an animal, and anytime you're going to shade an animal, it's going to be more complicated. So let me just demonstrate one more time something that's very simple, like an apple or a pear. Okay, so that's why we started out with that at the beginning of the year, because fruit like apples and pears are very simple shapes. So we just had 2 circles for our pear, and then we connected them like this. Okay, and then we erased the middle. That's how we drew our pear shape. And I'm going to just draw a little bit of a curved line right here where the stem is coming out. Okay, so there's my basic pear shape. Okay, so now we're going to add some shading, and we're going to do it very similar to how we did our circle. And even if you've already done this, if you're in, like I said, if you're in intermediate art or you're in Art 2 at Heritage, you've done an apple or a pear with me before at the beginning of the year, but let's do it again because it's just really good practice. So what you might want to do is just very lightly with your regular number 2 HB pencil is do some very light shading just all over the whole pear, like that. And you notice I didn't go to the edge because the edges are going to be either highlights or shadow. Okay. So go ahead and blend. Again, if you don't have a blending tool, you can use your finger. You might have to press kind of hard with your finger, or you can use a Q-tip. All right, and then I'm going to go to my 6B pencil, which is much softer, much darker, and I'm going to add some dark shadow at the bottom. And then remember, I have to decide where my light's coming from. So just like on my circle, I'm going to do the same thing here with my pear. I'm going to imagine that the light is coming from right there, from that upper left-hand corner. So if it's coming from there, that means that this whole right side is going to be more shaded. And I'm going to have to turn my paper. So I'm not pressing hard. It's just automatically darker because my pencil's darker, my pencil's softer. Okay, so I'm just getting some darker values. So remember our value scale? So what I'm doing right now might be, oh, I don't know, maybe a 6 on the value scale. And this might be more like a 3. So it might help if you think of the values in terms of numbers. Okay, that might help you a little bit. All right, so let me blend this with my blending tool. Okay, and again, you can go in a circular motion or you can go back and forth. Right now I'm going to do a circular motion. Well, I'm going to switch back and forth. So right now I'm going back and forth, and then I'm going to switch to circular. Okay, so you see how using a blending tool, not only does it soften the pencil, but it smooths it out and it creates different values. So now, instead of just 6 and 3 on the value scale, I have 6 and maybe some 5 and 4 and 3. See what I mean? You've got some of those shades in between. Okay, now for this side, I'm going to have it mostly highlighted, but I do want a little bit of shading, maybe from my regular HB number 2 pencil. And I do want some shadow here above this curved line. And of course I'm going to want to shade my stem. So probably the darkest shadowy part's going to be right here, and also at the bottom of my pear, and at the farthest, the point that's farthest away from the source of light. So here's the light. Here opposite is where it's going to be the darkest. Does that make sense? So this takes lots of practice, guys. This is why I want you to practice. Just because you did it once doesn't mean you're an expert on it, right? You got to keep practicing. The more you practice, the better you will get. And the better you get at shading, the better all your drawings will be. And they'll just really start to come to life. Okay, so I need to make a little bit more of a highlight now. So I'm going to use my eraser. And it doesn't have to be just like a circle shape. It can kind of go along the shape of the pear. Maybe I'll come out a little bit like this. And I don't want to just leave it like that. I want to blend it a little bit. So maybe this time I'll use my Q-tip. Okay, so I'm just softening it, or maybe I'll use my finger. So I'm putting a little bit of pencil back into that area that I erased. Does that make sense? So it's not too light, it's not too white. And then maybe I will take my 8B pencil, which is my darkest. And I'll just kind of outline that a little bit. All right. So There we have more of a three-dimensional looking shaded pear. And if we really wanted to look 3D, we could even add our cast shadow. So again, it would be opposite from where the light is. It would be going off to the side, maybe like this. You can try to do kind of a pear shape if you want, meaning it's kind of curved like that. And I'm just shading it in. It's going to be darkest right next to the pear. As it goes out further away from the pear, it's going to maybe be a little bit lighter. So there's a cast shadow. Okay, so what I'd like you to do, now that we've shaded a circle and we've shaded a pear, I'd like you to just look for some simple objects around the house, like maybe a vase or a glass, a flower pot, even just a simple can, a bottle of some kind. Look for simple objects around the house and just set them on the table and draw them and then try to shade them. It would be great practice. Here's my drawing of a rhino. And I did send out a link for this project, so maybe some of you have already watched that. Maybe some of you have already started your rhino drawing, and maybe you haven't. And if you haven't, if you want to do this project, you can watch that video. But I'm hoping that the lesson that we just did on shading will help you and will make this project not seem so difficult. I hope that the shading now will not seem too overwhelming to you. And you might want to keep your value scale that you made close by. You might want to look at it while you're working on this project so that you can make sure that you have all these different values, or at least some of them, in your project. And remember that a lot of it comes down to the blending. So make sure you do a lot of blending and just take your time. So I hope this video was helpful to you, and I want to encourage you to keep practicing your shading. The more you practice, the better you're going to get. Have a great week, everybody.